There is a tree so valuable that people risk federal prosecution to steal it, not for its fruit, not for its medicine, for its wood. But the most powerful thing about this tree was never the timber. It was always what grew on the outside. The green hull that wraps its fruit contains a compound so biologically aggressive, it kills the plants growing beside it. It poisons the soil for yards in every direction. Ancient cultures used it to stun fish in rivers, not as food, as a weapon. For centuries, healers on 3 continents used it against something living inside the human body, something that modern medicine now calls a global health crisis, affecting over 1 billion people. Then the pharmaceutical industry looked at this tree and decided it was not worth studying, not because the evidence was weak, because the tree cannot be patented. Welcome to our channel. Every video unearths one more secret they forgot to bury deeper. In 2004, federal agents in Oregon investigated what looked like a routine timber theft. A black walnut tree had been cut from private land and hauled away in the night. What made this case unusual was not the crime. It was how they solved it. Investigators collected wood samples from the stump. They collected samples from the suspected log. Then they sent both to a laboratory for DNA analysis. The DNA matched perfectly, a single tree proven by its own genetic code. The conviction followed. That story tells you something important. Black walnut is not an ordinary tree. A single mature specimen can be worth $10,000 or more in timber value alone. Thieves plan operations around stealing them. Landowners hire guards. States have passed specific laws against walnut poaching. No other tree in North America generates this level of criminal attention. But the timber was never the real treasure. The real treasure is the hull, the thick green, fleshy outer layer that wraps the walnut before it matures. The part most people throw away. The part that indigenous peoples of eastern North America never discarded. The Cherokee used black walnut hull preparations to expel intestinal worms. The Iroquois applied hull extracts to skin infections and ringworm. Multiple nations along the eastern seaboard documented its use for fevers, for diarrhea, for fungal conditions. But perhaps the most striking traditional use was this. Hunters and fishermen would crush the green hulls and throw them into slow-moving rivers. Within minutes, fish would rise to the surface, stunned. The hulls contained compounds so biologically potent, they temporarily overwhelmed the nervous system of aquatic animals. This was not cooking. This was not flavoring. This was a weapon. The plant was called Juglans nigra, black walnut. And what made it a weapon in rivers would later point scientists towards something far more significant. This was not folk superstition. This was precise, documented, cross-cultural knowledge accumulated over centuries of direct observation. In the 1970s, researchers began isolating the compound responsible for black walnut's biological aggression. They found it in the hull, the bark, the roots, the leaves, and the surrounding soil. They named it juglone. Juglone is a naphtoquinone, a naturally occurring chemical that interferes with specific enzymatic processes in living organisms. In plants, it blocks the energy cycle that drives cellular respiration. Trees within the root zone of a black walnut simply stop growing. Tomatoes wilt within days. Apple trees die within seasons. Farmers learn quickly. Nothing grows comfortably in the shadow of a black walnut. But here is what the agricultural research accidentally revealed. Juglone does not only affect plants. In laboratory settings, researchers tested it against a range of parasitic organisms. The results were consistent. Juglone demonstrated measurable activity against intestinal worms, including Ascaris species, among the most common parasitic infections on Earth, affecting an estimated 800 million people globally, more than the entire population of Europe. It also showed activity against certain protozoa, including organisms in the same family as the parasites responsible for some of the most widespread tropical diseases on the planet. The proposed mechanism is direct. Juglone appears to interfere with the electron transport chain. The same enzymatic pathway it disrupts in plants. Parasites depend on this pathway for energy production. Disrupt it, and they cannot sustain themselves. A 2019 study published in Parasitology Research tested black walnut hull extract against helminth larvae in controlled conditions. The The extract showed significant inhibitory effects at concentrations achievable through traditional preparation methods. That is not anecdote. That is a peer-reviewed result in an indexed scientific journal. The gap is not between tradition and science. The gap is between laboratory evidence and funded human trials. And that gap has a very specific explanation. But here is where the story becomes dangerous. Black walnut has been used medicinally for over 1,000 years. Laboratory evidence exists. Animal studies exist. Traditional cross-cultural documentation exists on 3 continents. And yet, there is not a single large-scale human clinical trial testing black walnut hull against parasitic infection. Not one. To understand why, you need to understand how pharmaceutical research actually works. Drug companies do not fund studies out of scientific curiosity. They fund studies when the result can be owned. A successful trial produces a patent. A patent produces a monopoly. A monopoly produces profit margins that justify the investment. Black walnut is a tree. It has grown wild across eastern North America for thousands of years. It cannot be patented. Any company that spent $10 million proving black walnut hull eliminates intestinal parasites would simply be opening the market for every competitor to sell the same hull at a lower price. The investment is unrecoverable, so the investment never happens. Meanwhile, the global anti-parasitic drug market is worth over $4 billion annually. Albendazole, mebendazole, ivermectin, patented compounds, manufactured at scale, prescribed by physicians, reimbursed by insurance systems. Each one generates revenue, each one justifies continued research funding, each one keeps the infrastructure pointed in one direction. A tree in your backyard threatens that infrastructure, not because it competes directly, because it represents a model of medicine that does not require a supply chain, a prescription, or a profit margin. The USDA has published research on juglone's agricultural effects. Universities have studied its allelopathic properties extensively, but coordinated federal funding for human trials on its anti-parasitic effects? It does not exist. The science stops precisely where the patent opportunity disappears. This plant did not fail to prove itself. It was never given the opportunity. Here is what you can do with this knowledge today. Black walnut trees grow wild across the eastern United States, from New England down through the Appalachians and into the Midwest. If you do not have one on your property, they are common along roadsides, forest edges, and riverbanks. The hulls are available dried from herbal suppliers and as liquid tincture from specialty botanical companies. The timing matters. Green hulls, harvested before they turn black and oxidize, are considered the most potent. Once the hull darkens, juglone content drops significantly. Traditional harvest happens in early autumn, when the outer hull is still firm and bright green. The traditional tincture method is straightforward. Chop fresh green hulls and submerge them in high-proof alcohol. Seal and store in a dark location for 4 to 6 weeks. Strain and bottle. Traditional dosing in herbal practice runs between 10 and 20 drops in water, taken 2 to 3 times daily for short courses. One caution that matters. Black walnut is a strong botanical. It is not appropriate for pregnant or nursing women, people on blood thinners, or those with known liver conditions. Short-term use is the traditional approach, not indefinite daily consumption. You do not need a prescription to harvest a hull. You do not need a pharmacy to prepare a tincture. You do not need anyone's permission to access what healers on this continent have known for centuries. The same juglone that kills the plants around it, that stunned fish in rivers for centuries, that federal researchers studied extensively, stops exactly where the patent office begins. That is not a coincidence. That is a policy.